Hey everyone, this is Tracy with American SPCC, and A Brighter Future starts here. Today, in honor of National Adoption Month, we'd like to welcome adoption attorney Alice H. Murray to the show to discuss Adoption 101, Alice in Wondering Land. I love that. Alice, hi, thank you so much for making time for us today. I know you have a really busy schedule.
Well, I love talking about adoption, so I would make time to talk to you about it, Tracy, especially during National Adoption Month. That's the time when it's a good time to learn about adoption.
Huge. And I actually was really excited about this interview today because I'm looking forward to learning more about it. I don't feel that I know enough about it other than like what we see on TV or what we hear or maybe stories in the news. So just to get us started, tell us, what is adoption?
Adoption is a legal process. That's why I do it, because I'm an attorney. The law tells you what you can do to adopt, and it's all state law. So you watch a TV movie and you think this is how adoption's done. Well, no, that's how it's done in that state. But there's 50 different ways of doing adoption in this country, and there's some significant differences. But adoption itself is a legal recognition of a family. So, in the eyes of the law, people that are not biologically related now, in the eyes of the law, have a family relationship. Mother and child, father and child. The parent-child relationship, they're not blood related, but in the eyes of the law, they have a parent-child relationship. And it's really a two-step process. People think, oh, adoption's great, it's a happy thing, and it is. But in order to build one family and create a legal forever family, we have to destroy the family relationship that existed previously, because you can't have two sets of parents. So if a couple adopts a child, the law terminates any kind of connection that the biological parent has to the child. They'll always be biologically related, but in the eyes of the law, they don't have any connection whatsoever. So
Wow.
legal process, and it's recognizing a family. It's creating a family by severing ties from the initial family.
Wow, that is kind of bittersweet.
It
I
is.
think that there's this conception that that original family, the ties are already severed. No? Wouldn't there already be that misconception maybe?
People think so many different things. I've heard so many different things about adoption. A lot of what people think is what they've heard from somebody else or seen on TV. And I don't think they really get into, and it's not really entertaining to hear about the law aspect. But yeah, they assume it's like, oh, well, I just signed a piece of paper. And that's what a lot of people that contact me think. Oh, mom just signs a piece of paper and it's done. And it's way more complex than that. Only the law can terminate rights. So you can sign a paper and say, I want John and Jane Doe to adopt my baby, but there has to be a legal recognition before that, before you terminate rights or you create another family.
Wow. So how, or is adoption law different than all the other types of law?
I think it's totally different. It's for three reasons. First of all, most law is transactional. You're making a deal, you're working, so you're making a contract with somebody, and something goes awry, so you breach a contract, or somebody hits you in their car, so there's some kind of issue between you. Um, but actually, with adoption, it's collaborative. It's not really adversarial. If you're suing over a contract breach or an automobile accident, there's going to be a clear winner and a loser, and they're against each other. Like, you hit me, you owe me money. No, it was your fault. It's not mine.
Okay.
But within adoption, everybody comes together with a common goal. We want what's best for the child. So it's not that we're at odds, we're all working together to achieve the same end. And that's what I love about doing adoption work, because done correctly, you're going to have a win-win-win situation, because the child gets some loving and stable home that the child may not have had. The adoptive parents are able to fulfill their dream of becoming a parent, And then the birth parents have the peace of mind of knowing that they have made a plan for their child to have a good life. For whatever reason, they may not be able to do it. Maybe it's health issues, mental health issues, criminal history, substance use, whatever the reason. They've done what a parent does, which is make sure their child is taken care of. So they've got that peace of mind. Because, in the breach of contract or the automobile accident, there's going to be a winner and a loser. But everybody should come out winning if you do an adoption correctly. And I'm not going to say it's not difficult, because it's a very emotional practice. And that's another reason that adoption is a little bit different than everything else. I mean, sure, people get upset about money, but it really gets you right here when you're talking to it. That's somebody's life. That's your family. That's your child. So it's very, very emotional. It's not just about money or words. It's about life.
Wow, wow, wow. You're making me see this from a whole different perspective. In other words, adoption or putting a child up for adoption really is one of the most selfless things that a parent can do, because it's got to be one of the hardest things
Exactly.
that
That's
anyone
why it's
can
so
do.
unselfish, because it's easy to say, oh, that's my child. I love my child. I want to be with my child. But if you know you're not in a position for whatever reason to provide what that child needs, then that's the most unselfish thing that you can possibly do. And that's why it really upsets me when I work with birth mothers and they have friends or family that are saying, how could you just give your child up? And I'm like, that's not what you're doing.
Wow.
Giving up is like you're just abandoning. You're doing the exact opposite. You're making a considered plan. You're taking into account, what does my child need? What's the best thing for your child? And that's what a parent's job is, make sure their child is taken care of. So they've fulfilled that. So it upsets me when people, look down on adoption. It's a very loving, unselfish thing to do.
There's a lot of shame, it sounds like, involved in
Yeah,
adoption. And then
absolutely.
apparently part of your job is really to help them reframe the way they're viewing their own actions and the whole situation.
That's right. There's a lot of guilt. The birth parents feel a lot of guilt that they're doing something wrong or bad. And it's like, no, no. I mean, if you left your child, if you gave birth to a child and put it in a dumpster, I just heard a story about that not too long ago. Okay, that's abandoning your child. But giving a chance at not only a chance at life, but at a good, stable life, that's very, very unselfish. That's
Wow.
very difficult to do. You carry
Yes.
that child for, I mean, I'm a mom. I carried a child. I can't imagine. That's very, very unselfish. So I always tell the birth mothers, I admire you so much because I know how difficult this is. And you're putting somebody else before yourself. And that's the very essence of a mother or a parent. So,
So true.
yeah.
Take me back a little bit, Alice. At what point during law school or right after law school did you know that you wanted to be an adoption attorney?
Tracy, I fell into this. This was nothing I ever planned to do. This wasn't even on the horizon for me. I didn't even really know about adoption.
Oh
I
my
mean,
goodness.
I knew it existed, and we kind of skimmed over it in law school, but that really wasn't, my focus. Not that I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but it wasn't anything that even really crossed my mind. And when I got out of law school, I got a job at a large law firm in Ohio, and they put me in the business and litigation departments. That was the most boring. I'm telling you, I got no satisfaction out of that whatsoever. And that's one more thing I want to add about the adoption practice. This is one of the most personally satisfying things that you can do in adoption. I mean, everybody needs help, but it's like, how much more of an impact could you make than touching someone's life? I mean, we're saying one child's going to spend the rest of it. That's huge.
Tremendous.
But anyway, back to the story. So I'm at this huge, big law firm doing this litigation stuff where people are just fighting over when are we going to get together to talk about it. No, I don't want to do it at your office. I want, no, we don't want. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so it did nothing for me. And my husband was in the military and he got orders down to Florida. And when I moved down here, I was trying to find a job. And I started just working part-time doing some research while I was getting ready to take the bar exam down here. And one of the attorneys I was working for said, let's go to a bar association luncheon. And I went, and he introduced me and said, Alice just moved here from Ohio. She's looking to, get some legal work. If anybody needs some help, you might want to talk to her. Well, Rob Harrell, who's the other attorney in my office, came over and said, hey, I need some part-time help. I ended up doing adoption work for him, and I absolutely loved it. And
Wow.
I said, could I do this full time? He goes, well, I just don't know if I have enough work for you. You might have to handle some divorces. Well, I have never handled a divorce since I have been there. I mean, I just jumped in, and I love doing the work. I just absolutely love it. I mean, believe me, it's got some really low lows, but in the end, it's something that you say, this made a difference. This helped.
Yes.
So, yeah. So
That's
I never intended to do it, but I am so thankful that this is the direction that I ended up. And
God had a plan for you.
He did. He did.
Wow.
It was a God thing that I got there because, like I said, I never even thought about that. But
Never
I
even
look
questioned
back.
that.
But what's funny is I look back, and of course, if you move to Florida from another state, you have to take the bar exam again. So I'd already passed the bar in Ohio, had to take the bar down here. I look back on it, and I only remember one question from the bar exam, and it was the very first one in Florida, and it was about an adoption. And I look back, and that was kind of like,
wow. That was
I get goosebumps
foreshadowing.
thinking about that. I was like,
Yeah.
wow,
I
that was, a true sign of, things to come. So yeah.
That's incredible.
I love it. And
Mm.
adoption has touched me since then. My sister and her husband were not able to have children. My sister has endometriosis, so they've ended up adopting two children, and I helped with the adoption of my nephew. So
Oh,
I have a niece, and my niece was adopted from overseas. But so I've seen adoption from the professional side, and I've seen it from the personal side. And, it is just such a huge blessing, both sides. It's very satisfying work. And I couldn't love my niece and nephew any more than my sister had ever loved.
beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful. What percentage of adoptions in the United States do you think come from American to American adoptions versus adopting children from overseas?
Well, right now, the adoptions from overseas have really plummeted. There's lots of different reasons from that. There's a lot of things done that shouldn't be done, baby traffic and things like that. I mean, Guatemala used to be a huge country for people to adopt from, and it was quite rife with corruption. So they just totally shut that down. And that was one of the biggest countries. Then there's some anti-American views. They're like, oh, they don't think we can take care of our own children, or why should we be putting our children in a different culture? We need to keep them in our own culture. So the numbers have really gone a lot lower, but I would say the vast majority of adoptions in America are not from overseas. It's a very small percentage, less than 10%.
You mentioned before that there are some lows, and yet there's also so much fulfillment. I'm curious about some of the things that surprised you when you stepped into the adoption field, because there are some heartbreaking moments, but there's also some really fulfilling, beautiful moments.
I think the two biggest things that surprised me about adoption, number one, I had no idea that infertility was such an issue in this country.
Ugh.
I mean, almost everybody that comes to me, I mean, there's some people that just say, hey, we're blessed. We're in this wonderful position. We would love to help a child out that needs a home. So there's some people, that are like that. But the vast majority of couples that come to us wanting to adopt are suffering from infertility. And it's like, I had no idea that this is such a problem. I didn't even think about that. Everybody focuses on the birth mother, which, I mean, she is the main thing we're thinking about in an adoption because she's having this child and we need to help her. But I was just shocked at how much infertility that people are experiencing. And then the second thing I think was who the birth mothers are. I mean, I'd never been involved in adoption before. And when I first got into this, I would think, okay, well, the birth mothers, it's going to be some, 16-year-old, a teenager and her boyfriend. Obviously, it was an unplanned pregnancy. They're too young to be able to parent. So they're doing the loving thing and putting the child in a very good home. And that's just not what I see. It's not teenage pregnancies. My typical birth mother is in her early 20s. She's a single parent, so she already has other children.
Oh,
Usually a high school dropout. Um, so she's at a position where I've got other children, but I'm it. I can't afford another child. And there's only so many hours in the day and I only have so much energy. So many will say, well, if I have another child, then that's going to take away from the children that I already have. And it's not fair to any of my children for me to raise another child. It's not just about the child that she's carrying, but it's also about the children she's already raising. So that kind of adds a different element because most of the things you see, are it's this, the teenager and, this is the only child, but that's really not what we see at all.
do you see repeat adoptions from the
Yes.
same mother?
Unfortunately, yes. I have one birth mother that we worked with, and she placed 5 children through our office. So it's good and bad. I mean, it's sad that she finds herself in these situations and is not able to, change what's going on in her life. But she did care enough
Wow.
not to go out and have an abortion. I mean, she found herself pregnant and she went through all 5 of those pregnancies and she cared about finding a good home for her child. And it also speaks to the adoption process because obviously she felt like it was a good option. She was treated respectfully and with dignity. We offered her pictures and updates on the children she placed, and we've always provided that when she's asked. So, for her, that was a good option. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sad that she's in that
Yeah.
situation, but I feel positive, and 3 of the children were placed together. So we try not to separate the
Oh,
children. So 3 of them were in the
beautiful.
same home. They said, I'm sorry, we can't adopt another. They just weren't in a position to take another child. But we found a family and we said, hey, there's other siblings. Would if you take this child, would you allow us to exchange information? And this was before the 5th child, but they sent me a Christmas card and they had gotten together. The 2 families had gotten together and they sent me
Oh,
a picture
nice.
of all 4 children together.
Okay,
So
I'm gonna cry. I'm
I
gonna
know
cry.
it's so
That's
sweet.
so, like, heartwarming. That's so
It
nice.
is. It
That's
is.
beautiful. And this woman who did keep getting pregnant, she actually blessed other families with
Absolutely.
beautiful children. So
Yeah,
that's
and I tell my birth mothers, that's like, because they're so upset when they come in. I mean, you're not planning to be pregnant, and then you feel guilty. You're having to think
right.
about adoption. You're not feeling well. You may be getting flack from people when you say, "I'm thinking about adoption." But and I tell these birth mothers that there's no do-over button in life for anybody.
Yeah.
So this is where you are. So you can't go backwards. So don't sit here and beat yourself up about I shouldn't have done this or whatever. All you can do is go forward. And I tell them, look, you can make something really positive come out of this. I'm not going to say it's easy, but look how positive it could be. Positive, a wonderful home for your child, positive for you. You got peace of mind that you took care of your child in the way that was best for the child under the circumstances. And then you've blessed some family. I had one family, and the wife had 12 miscarriages.
Oh,
And then she finally was able to. I mean, these are huge miracles.
beautiful.
I
Yes.
told birth mothers, I said, if I could have a video of when these people first see the baby that they're going to adopt, you would see this is a huge miracle. This is going to be something wonderful. So don't look back and beat yourself up because you can't change it, but you can make something really good come out of the situation that you find yourself.
Alice, you are changing lives. You are changing lives. I love what you do. And I
I
love how
love
you
it
make
too. Now, I'm going to stress there is the downside, because sometimes things don't go through. I mean, it's ultimately a woman's decision about whether she's going to place her child for adoption or
Right.
not. Sometimes a birth mother will say, "Well, no, I think adoption's best. We'll choose a family." And then when it comes down to it, she decides she's going to parent the child.
Oh,
So that's just heartbreaking.
for the
I mean,
other
it's
family?
not good for anybody, because then the mom feels guilty. She's disappointed somebody. The people are heartbroken. They don't get a child. And then for me, it's horrible because I'm the one that has to break that news to the couple.
Ah,
It's like you lose a case on, okay, you didn't get $50,000 for your car accident. You only got 20. So it wasn't a good outcome. For me, it's like, this is change. I had to actually call somebody on Christmas one time and
oh,
tell them that the mom had decided to parent. So it's kind of like, let me call and blow your world up. I'm going to stick this knife in your heart and twist it. So it's very emotional. I mean, it's a legal process, but there are extreme emotions that are involved
oh,
in
wow.
an adoption. It's not just about words on a piece of paper, and following the, legal steps. It's, these are
Wow.
people's lives and their emotions. So,
Alice, talk to us about some of the misconceptions around adoption, like what we see on TV. They're
well,
the
my
portray.
biggest, I always tell people this when they ask about adoption. It's like, have you seen the movie Juno? That's the perfect example for me, because Juno is, first of all, about a teenage couple that they get pregnant. And I'm not saying that doesn't ever happen, but that's just not the typical birth mother that we see, in the real world.
Right.
So that's a big misconception about who the birth mother is. Um, I It also makes it seem like it's pretty easy to adopt if you watch that movie, because I think Jennifer Garner was the prospective adoptive mother, and she looks in the Thrifty Nickel and sees an ad, or that they had placed an ad, and the birth mother sees it, and all of a sudden they're together, and it just poof, it happened. That's not how it is. I mean, there's no guarantees of a baby being placed with someone who's looking to adopt, because there's way more people looking to adopt than there are babies to be adopted.
Oh,
So, and you can wait a long time before you receive a placement. I mean, my sister and her husband, they waited 3 years before they were able to adopt my nephew. So it's not something where, oh, we want to do this, let's just call somebody and poof, we've got a baby. It doesn't work like that. It's a long time process. Now, for some people, it may happen quickly, but I think that's more exceptional than the average case. And then the other thing I don't like about Juno is the adoption attorney that was portrayed in there. They have this female attorney that goes to the house to meet with the birth mother, and she's wearing this big, impressive black suit. She's got her hair in this severe bun. And I was like, that's not what adoption attorneys look like. It's not a transactional. I mean, if you're going to a meeting to negotiate a contract or a business merger, sure, that's how you dress. But when I meet with a birth mother, it's not some big transaction. I try to dress casually. I don't want to
right.
make her feel uncomfortable because she's, so taken aback that it's an attorney. I mean, that's daunting enough to hear that you're going to meet with an attorney. I tell them, hey, come in and meet with you. I promise I don't bite. It's okay. But I try and dress casually and make it a more personal, because this is about a very personal thing. I don't want it to be formal and stuffy. I want somebody that can truly interact with me. And that's just not what you see. And I'm on the Florida Adoption Council. I'm on the board of directors for the
Nice.
Florida Adoption Council. So I've talked with plenty of adoption professionals, and I know these people. They have a heart. They're very people oriented, and they're not stuffy like that. It's not transactional. They cater. I mean, these are human beings and lives that we're talking about. So they're much more personal and not stuffy and, hands off.
Yeah, they're not walking in like Lilith from Frasier,
No,
right?
my hair's not long enough for a severe bun.
Right, right, right. They wanna be relatable, more relatable, right?
Yes, is.
not as intimidating per
It's
se.
intimidating if you go. First of all, most people don't go to a law office. This is the first time people have probably ever been to a law office, maybe the first time they've ever talked to an attorney, or if they have, maybe it wasn't a good, interaction. Maybe, they had some, interaction with the law, and so they're not looking forward to this. So anything you can do to make things easier for them to interact with you, because like I said, it's a collaborative effort. So we want to interact, and I want the birth mother to know I care about
Yeah,
her. It's not.
yeah.
That's the other misconception that people have about adoption. I've been called a baby stealer, a baby seller. Um,
Oh,
no, believe
yeah,
me, I am not in this for the money. I mean,
yeah,
obviously, I'm able to survive, but
yeah.
I'm not making big bucks doing adoption work, and I'm not selling babies. It's not like I'm out, scouring around. I mean, birth mothers contact me and said I need assistance. It's not like I'm out stealing or trying to, take something from somebody, and it's ultimately their decision. Now, I know in any occupation or profession, there's people that do things wrong, and I know there's probably people out there that do that. And one of the things I've heard is, they prey on women that are in prison. I actually had a birth mother that told me, when I was in prison, I made a placement, and this attorney contacted me and told me if I do this, there'd be $10,000 in my bank account when I got out. I'm like, well, that's not what we do. We're not buying and selling babies. So I
Wow.
know there's people out there that do the wrong thing, but that's a very, very small majority. Most of the people are in this because they care about people and they want to do things the right way. So we're not baby stealers.
Something you said a little bit earlier is sticking in my head. You
Mhm.
said that there are way more people looking to adopt than babies available.
Correct.
Are there any statistics on that?
Well, yes. You can look at the U.S. government has an adoption profile that they do, and they can. That's where you can get some statistics about countries where people have adopted from. They also have statistics about adoptions. I mean, you can Google it. There's plenty of information. Um, but adoptions are, and the numbers have really been declining over the years. I've done adoptions for a little over 30 years, and I think right now is the lowest number of babies that are being placed since I've been doing this.
You
Um,
know,
there's a couple reasons I think for that. One is historical because the birth rates have been going down for decades. This is not something new. We've seen the birth rates going down. Well, if less babies are born, that means there's less babies that could be adopted. So, I think it was back in June. It's been a few months ago, but they had an article about, birth rates are down so much now that, we're below population replacement level. So, there's not as many babies being born. So obviously there's not going to be as many babies placed. Now, of course, there's some societal issues. There's no stigma anymore, or not much of one, for being a single parent. So the fact that someone's not married isn't necessarily going to mean they're going to make a placement. So single parenting is okay. There's financial resources through the government now for single parents to raise children, and of course, birth control is much more widely available than it was, a long time in the past. And then the most recent impact is the pandemic. And the pandemic really did a whammy on adoptions. I mean, for our office, we made the least placements in 2020 that we've made as long as I've ever been doing adoptions. And that's because most of the placements that we make are unplanned pregnancies. Nobody goes out and says, "Oh, I think I'll get pregnant and place my child for
right,
adoption."
right.
It's usually an unplanned thing. So when the world closes down, people are not going out to, clubs and restaurants, bars, large social gatherings. There's less of that social interaction that might lead to relationships where,
Mm.
an unplanned pregnancy might result. Everybody's staying at home. So the numbers really, really, really went down. So,
Wow.
you know,
Yeah.
that's where we are. So people are like, why is it, taking so long? Or why, I haven't heard anything from you. And it's like, well, I can't make a placement unless somebody calls me and says they need assistance. And people are just the numbers are down. I mean, which is a good thing. We don't want people to be
Right.
stuck in positions where they're facing unplanned pregnancies, but it is an option if that's where you find yourself. Um, but sometimes people have that. A lot of people, not just about adoption, but I think Americans in general have a fast food mentality about everything. We want something and we want it now. We want to pull up to the drive-through window and get whatever we want.
Okay.
And it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that.
So let's say along those lines that, there are many different people, eh, pregnancies are, it's getting more difficult for, maybe women, whatever environmental factors or hereditary factors, it's getting more difficult for a certain maybe group of women to get pregnant. And
Mhm.
then they go to speak to an adoption attorney and they want to adopt, or, they and their husbands, like, what is that criteria that an adoption attorney looks for
Mhm.
in order to place the child?
Well, there's two levels to look at. The first is what's legally required because this is a legal process. So the law is going to say who's able to adopt. So, and again, there's 50 states, so there's going to be 50 different sets of requirements, but
Yeah.
common ones might be. Now, Florida doesn't have an age requirement, other you have to be legally an adult, but some might put a maximum, if you're over 65 or whatever, I don't know.
Oh,
They may prohibit people from adopting that maybe they've been convicted of a crime against children. So they're barred by law from adopting. So that's the legal standard. So the law says who is eligible to adopt. That's the first tier. The second tier is across the United States, regardless of what state it is, you have to have a favorable background investigation done of you if you're having a child placed with you that you're not related to by blood very closely. So that's a really intensive background investigation to
wow.
make sure, because the idea is some helpless child is going to be placed in your home. So we need to know that that child's going to be okay. So commonly what they'll do is they'll run a criminal background check to see if you have, a criminal history. It doesn't mean if you've ever been arrested, you can't adopt. I mean, maybe you were young and stupid when you were in college and, stole a stop sign and got arrested, but, you know,
So
but you have a clean record like that. Now, if, there's been, an offense against a child or offense involving physical violence, then you're
yeah,
probably not going to be approved.
yeah.
But they'll check to see child abuse history. They'll make sure you're financially able to adopt. You've got to be able to afford another family member. And they will require somebody to come to your house and physically see where the child's going to be. Is it a safe environment? Is the house big enough for another household member? So that's the second tier. They have to have a favorable home study. And then kind of the third tier is whoever the people are working with. I mean, if it's your office, you can say, well, in my practice, I'm not going to work with anybody that, or you have to be this or whatever. So you can set your own standards. I know
Mm.
some I've heard people have come in and said, well, I contacted this adoption agency and they said, if you haven't been married over 2 years, we can't work with you.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
not legal. I mean, not illegal, but it's not a legal standard. It's like a policy or a
Right.
guideline that that particular office works with.
Wow.
So so it's very complicated. Adoption is not anything easy, but there's legal standards who can adopt. Then you have to pass that background investigation, and then whoever you're working with may have their own office guidelines and policies about who they will work with. If
That
you're
is
over a
so
certain age, we may
interesting.
not work with you, or if you hadn't been married, this length of time, we're not going to work with you. So very, very complicated.
Alice, as a point of interest, just because I'm
Mhm.
curious, what is the oldest age of a child that you ever placed?
Well, probably mid-teens, maybe probably 15. And that was a situation where somebody knew of a situation where the parents had died and they wanted to adopt the child. It
Mm,
wasn't the birth
yeah.
mother that came to us. Now, for a birth mother actually coming to me and saying, I need to place my child for adoption, I think it was 5.
Oh,
And that was heart-wrenching for our staff because, a 5-year-old is old enough to understand, I've been with mom, I know who mom is, and then all of a sudden, mom's not around anymore. I mean,
yeah.
the birth mother came to our office. She had all the child's gear and clothes and toys in her car and brought the child in, and she came into my office and signed her paperwork, and then she left, leaving the child with us. I
Wow.
mean, believe me, it was the best thing. I know it was very, very difficult, but given her circumstances and the things that the child had been exposed to, that really was the best thing for the child. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it wasn't heart-wrenching for us to know. I
Right.
mean, regardless of what her issues were, that was his mom, and that's who he's bonded with, and that was the stability in his world. And all of a sudden,
Oh.
mom's gone.
So issues can range from lifestyle to mental stability to financial ability.
It may also be sometimes it's like the door A or door B. And we're seeing this a lot with the drug use, problems with drug use in the culture, because a lot of times, if mom's got substance abuse issues, the state may get involved and say, hey, you can't take this baby home. You tested positive for, whatever while you were pregnant. We're not going to let you take this baby home. We're going to put the baby in foster care and see if you can get your act together. Well, then mom has a choice. I mean, it's her choice, but it's door A. You can allow the state to take your child, put your child in foster care. So you don't have any choice as to where the child goes. That's up to the state. Or you could choose a private adoption where the child, you can have some input as to what good family you want this child to be placed with. So a lot of times moms will opt for the private adoption if they don't think they're going to be able to work a case plan, or they just don't want, their child to go into foster care. So sometimes it's because, I have a choice between this and that. And that's, of course, every birth mother has 3 options. And I just want you to know, when somebody comes in to see me, I'm not trying to convince them to do an adoption. I'm just presenting the option. It's ultimately her decision. I tell every birth mother, look, you're the only one in your shoes. I don't know what issues you have, what your capabilities are. You're the only one that can decide that. I'm just here to give you information. And if you decide on the adoption option, we're here to help you. Because she's got to do it. So there's 3 options. You can parent your child, you can choose an abortion, or you can choose adoption. And those are the 3 options. So you have to choose what the option is for you. Now, another thing I would like to just point out is, talking about guilt, moms feel guilty, about placing their child for adoption. But one of the other fears that they fear that the child is going to hate them because they placed their child for adoption. And I try to convince moms, any couple that we're placing with, they're going to think you walk on water because you made such an unselfish decision. Regardless of what your issues are, you made that wonderful decision, and the adoptive parents are going to let the child know that you love them so much that you did something that was so very difficult. So I have to tell the story. The other attorney in the office tells it pretty much to every birth mother, and I end up crying every time I hear it, so I'll try not to cry. he had an adoptee called him, and I'm sorry, the adoptee had just turned 18 and was getting ready to go off to college. And so he called Rob and he said, Mr. Harrell, I don't know if you remember me, but you placed me for adoption 18 years ago. And I wanted to call and let you know, I just graduated from high school. I've got a scholarship to Auburn. I've always wanted to go there. He said, my mom's been a stay-at-home mom. She's been very involved, very loving. My dad's been very involved with me. He coached my sports teams, and he thought, I am just so blessed. And he said, I really need to go thank my parents for that. And he said, Mr. Harrell, then it just kind of hit me like a lightning bolt. He said, you know who I really need to thank? My birth mother. Because 18 years ago, she was sitting in some hospital bed in pain after having given birth to me. And she had to sign a piece of paper. She was probably crying,
Mhm.
knowing she was being separated from her child, but she knew that's what was best for me. And when she signed that piece of paper, it was like taking gift wrap and just wrapping up my entire life and handing it to me. And she's
Oh,
the one that's given this to me. And I tell the birth mothers that they're not going to think they're not going to hate you. They're going to understand you trying to do what was best. And that's what the adoptive parents are going to convey. But people, but they're very concerned that, but I think that's the guilt from them. But no.
beautiful. That is a beautiful, beautiful story. Totally crying over here. So we're just
Yeah,
gonna.
yeah.
That's a beautiful story.
I
And
know.
that leads us right into something else that I wanted to ask you about. What is the
Excuse me.
happy side, like the happy, like what it means in the life of a child, what it means in the life of an adoptive parent to have
Well,
that gift, to have
it is just a
not only,
huge it's a huge miracle for the adoptive parents
yeah,
because like I said, most of them, I mean, yes, it's heartbreaking for the mom because she's been in this situation where she's facing an unplanned pregnancy, but there's also heartbreak on the other side because many of these people have suffered from infertility. They've tried for years to get pregnant or they can't, or they've had successive pregnancies and they lose miscarriages or stillbirths. I had one where um, the wife had to have an emergency C-section, lost the baby, and then they had to do an emergency hysterectomy, or she would have bled to
oh,
death. And so this was like, you go from the darkest dark, thinking you're never going to be able to be a parent, and then all of a sudden, here's this little bundle of joy, and your life just totally changes. So it's huge for the adoptive parents. Um, and then for the child, um, it actually gives them life. Sometimes literally, and if not literally, at least figuratively in the stable life that they get. I saw an ad several years ago, and that just struck me more than anything because the mom's faced with options. So there was this ad that I don't even know who did it, and there was no talk. It was just a split screen, and there's a hand in each one with a seed, and each seed is planted in the ground and covered over. And in one, they're watering it, and in the other one, they dig it up and throw it away. And there's just barren ground. And then they keep watering over here, and all of a sudden, there's this little sprout. Well, if you choose to abort your child's never going to have a life. No life, period. At least there's a chance at life if there's an adoption. And then it can be a wonderful life, a stable and loving environment. And that's what some birth mothers have said to me. This is the reason I'm doing it because I don't want this child to have the type of life that I did. Maybe they had an abusive parent, an absent parent, transient lifestyle, whatever it was, and they wanted something more for their child. So
beautiful.
it's a huge difference. It's a
Yeah.
huge difference. I mean, it may literally be the child may not ever be born if
Yeah.
mom chooses an abortion, but if she chooses a life for her child, it could be a wonderful life that she would love to give her child, but she knows she's not in a position to do it. And I'm not just talking about, oh, they get to go to Disney World or something. I'm talking about just a stable home. We placed one child, and he was 4, I think. And he had been with the mom, and the state was going to remove the child. But it was like when the adoptive parents got the child, they said whenever they gave him food, he would just take his hands and just eat because there was such food insecurity. When he ate, he never knew when he would eat again. And that was the kind of what he was used to. Or if he'd hear a siren, he goes, the cops are coming, the cops are coming. Like the police showed up at his parents' house all the time growing up, and that 4. So it's like it's just a totally different life that you're giving this child. Not necessarily material things, but just stability and love and the chance to have, to thrive in life.
Yeah.
Sure,
Maturity.
they'd be alive, and I'm sure the mom would love them, but what kind of life for that child? So it's a totally different life, and I've seen children thrive, and you're like, oh, this is so wonderful. Where would they have been if mom hadn't done it? I mean, that I keep in touch with some of the birth mothers and the adoptees still, and I see where they've where they've turned out, award-winning musicians, star athletes, one girl was going to be a pastor. I mean, it's just,
Beautiful.
their whole life ahead of them. But
Well,
it's the
beautiful.
mom, but it's the
Yeah.
birth mother to be thanked for that, because she made that very unselfish decision.
Beautiful choices.
Yes, ma'am.
Just wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's shift the conversation
Okay.
just to hear a little bit more about you and what you're doing these days, because you are now currently working part-time, I
Yes.
understand, right?
Yes.
Tell us what you're doing, because I think it's so interesting with the
Well,
rustic.
I've done this for over 30 years, so of course retirement's going to come at some point. The other thing I'm passionate about besides adoption is writing. I absolutely love to write, so I've written a lot. But I had an opportunity to join with a newly opened publisher. It's called Endgame Press. And I'm working on doing operation things for them, like copyright applications and proofing manuscripts. And it's just really cool to go from the writing side to the publishing side and see. But I've written, I love to write about everything. I have a very curious mind. I've written tons of adoption articles. I have a blog post where I look into My Voice is Humor. I look into current news topics and write about them. I do have a book that's going to be published, not till 2023, because it takes a long time for traditionally published books to come out, which is an updated version of an Agatha Christie story with a bunch of bonus material. I'm really excited about it because I love murder mysteries, so that's fun.
Very
But
interesting.
just love to write. Any opportunity I can, I just love to write.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so other fun fact.
Okay.
How many time zones are there in Florida?
There are two. Yes,
What was
there are
counting?
two. People have told me no. I am in the Florida Panhandle,
Okay.
and that is in the weird part of Florida that's in the central time zone. Most of the state of Florida is in the eastern time zone. But we are an hour behind those folks. So it's really fun when, as I mentioned, I'm on the board of directors for the Florida Adoption Council. So I think I'm the only director that's in this time zone. So they're always setting stuff. It's going to be at 2 p.m. or whatever. And I'm like, is that Eastern time? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's Eastern time. We forgot about Alice. So I go,
That's great.
so I'll send an email and say, yeah, the redheaded stepchild over here in the Panhandle is in a different time zone.
That's
Or I've
great.
had people that have called my office and said, literally, why aren't you answering the phone? It's like, whatever time. And I'm like, no, it's
Not in
just
my
8
neighborhood.
o'clock here. It's like, no. I'm like, yes, I think I know what time zone we're in. So they don't realize we're in a
So
totally
interesting.
different time zone. So yeah. So I'm not in the same time zone as Disney World. Sorry. I'm not even near Disney World. People also assume if you're in Florida, you're right next to Disney World. And actually in the Panhandle, I'm closer to New Orleans and to Atlanta than I am to Disney World. So
Interesting.
but I love the area where I am. It's a beautiful, the Panhandle is a beautiful, beautiful part of Florida. So
well, it must be very inspirational, because I understand that you're a prolific writer. In fact, tell us about your award-winning children's books.
Well, I haven't had any published yet. I did win an award for a manuscript that I did on a children's book. Everybody seems to love it. I would love to get it published, but the hard thing about publishing is you've got to have platforms. So if you don't have a bunch of people that love your work and are always commenting on it. So I have a big platform when it comes to maybe adoption because people have seen my writing on adoption. I've got lots of baby experience, but I don't have any, authority, so to speak, in the children's field. I mean, I'm not like a teacher or an educator in child development. So it was just a cute story that everybody likes, but you got to sell it. But if you want to talk about humor, I have to tell you this story.
Yeah.
So one of the hospital, the fun, went back when we could go to the hospital before pandemic, right? So I always go to the hospital when the babies are discharged, because typically they're releasing the baby to the attorney for legal reasons. I'm signing for the baby. Technically, I'm getting the baby, but the adoptive parents are with me right? So that leads to two funny things. When my son was in preschool, I would sometimes, if I had to go to the hospital on the weekend, I'd just take the family and we'd like go out for ice cream or something afterwards. We spent the time together. So the preschool class, they had the day where tell us what your parents do for a living. And my son goes, my mom is the boss of the babies. She tells the babies where they have to go. That's how he explained adoption attorney. Because he'd come to the hospital and he'd be waiting down in the lobby, and here'd be the nurse with the baby, and I'd say, okay, we're going to put the baby in this car, with John and Jane Doe. So that's all. I'm the boss of the babies. I told the babies where they had to go.
You're the baby boss. You're the baby boss.
The other funny one was, okay, back when we go to the hospital, one of the, and people have probably seen this on TV, and yes, this one's true. When you're discharged, they want to wheel you down in the wheelchair.
Sure.
Well, I went to this hospital, and the policy is whoever receives discharge of the baby, they have to be wheeled out. Well, here I am. I come from my office. I'm wearing a dress and high heels and hose.
The high
And
heel.
like, don't you want the adoptive mom to sit in the? No, you're the one that's technically getting the baby, so you got to sit in the wheelchair. So here I am. I'm in the wheelchair with this baby, all dressed up, and you get in the elevator, and you could just see all the people in the elevator like, she just had a baby. I mean, they weren't saying it, but you could just see the wheels turning. And I just wanted to say, this is not my baby. I'm the adoption attorney. But it was just so funny because you could just see the side eye.
That is great.
So ridiculous. I felt so crazy, all dressed up, coming down with this baby. And then we get to the outside. I get up and hand the baby to the adoptive mother. It was hilarious.
Alice,
so
you have
humorous things, yes.
You have such a wonderful personality, and you see life through a humorous lens, right? Tell us a little bit about how that plays into your writing.
Well, it plays into my practice and my writing and some other things that I do. I mean, life is tough, and when things get very emotional, sometimes if you can add a bit of humor or kind of break the tension, it really makes it better. And, the most intense probably of an adoption is when you're taking the birth mother's consent, because she knows, she takes that pen, she signs, she puts it down, that's it. She cannot change her mind. So that's very, very difficult. So I always try and keep some humor. I mean, I'm not making light of the situation, but I always try and interject some kind of humor to break that tension. And I remember one time I was up at the hospital, this birth mother's having a really hard time. That's why I think God has a sense of humor, because I cry at the commercials on TV, but yet I have to go and I cannot cry. I have to go into this attorney's because everybody else will be crying, and I got to keep it together.
You got to hold it together, yeah.
But she was having a really hard time, and she said, I need a drink. I need a drink. I just need a drink. And I'm like, well, I can get you a glass of water if you like. There, here's a pitcher of water. So I get her this glass of water. She goes, well, thank you, but I meant a drink. like a glass of white wine. And I'm like, well, this water is clear. We can pretend it was a glass. She thought, and she actually thanked me when it was over. She said, this was so difficult for me, and you made it easier by breaking the tension. So she didn't think I was, but it helps to be humorous and break the tension. So you got to do that. I've also found that people tend to pay attention and more soaks in when you add humor to it. So I try and explain things to people. I do consults with prospective adoptive parents, and I make jokes about some of the things. It's a very paper intensive process. So I tell people, look, you're not, if you're adopting, you're not going to labor and deliver this child, but you're going to work for it. Your labor is going to be paper pushing. You're not pushing the baby, you're pushing the paper. They all laugh at that, but then they remember. So when I send them the 25 pages of paper, that's stuck in their mind.
Sure.
So that's a good way. So when I write, I have a weekly blog that I write. That's my Alice in Wondering Land. And I post once a week on Thursday mornings, and I just pick a current topic of interest, something that really sparks, I really like to know about that. And I kind of delve into it and I write about it. And there's, from a humorous perspective,
Sure.
and people really like that because it's not dry, like just listening to the news. It's,
Yeah.
or reading a newspaper. It's, it
Very
presents some
fun.
really interesting facts. And really, it's like, yeah, I'll interject this stuff.
Right.
The
On just
government says
topics
this.
of the
Who would
day.
have thought that would have happened?
Yeah. On
But
just
people,
topics of the day outside of adoption, just, things going on in the news around the world, just
it
with
can
an
be adoption
interesting.
or something related. I recently did one on infertility, which may lead some people to adoption. Well, some people try. A lot of people will try infertility treatments before they go to the adoption option. It's like, let's do all that we can to rule out we can have biological
Yes.
children. So one of my recent blog posts was about they had some mix up. They've been having mix ups in fertility labs where they give the wrong embryo to the wrong
Oh
mom,
my
which is
goodness.
just devastating, just very devastating.
Oh,
So, but you learn a lot, and like I said, I mean, it's appropriate. It's not, it's not irreverent or anything like
yeah.
that, but it's a good way to learn. But you know, different
Got it.
topics. Yeah.
So in addition to Alice in Wonderland at wordpress.com, where else can people find you?
Well, if you want to hear about my writing journey, cool things about writing, what it's like to be a writer, what the process is, what are some cool things that are coming out, maybe some pieces that I've had published, articles. I do have a Facebook page, Alice H. Murray Writer. So you can just go to Facebook and Google that. So that's cool to see what's going on. Um, and if you professionally are interested in some of the things that I do, you can go to LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn, and I'm in an adoption group there. And sometimes I post about things related to adoption. Like I remember one thing I posted was like and I don't remember the answer now that I've said that, but what were the top 4 countries for international adoptions in the last year that they reported? And it was kind of interesting because it wasn't what I necessarily thought it would be. So that's if you're interested in the actual adoption side, or getting information about adoption, I would go to the LinkedIn Alice H. Murray.
Alice H. Murray. Got it.
Right.
Okay, so again, you heard it here. You can find Alice on Facebook at Alice H. Murray Writer. You could look her up on LinkedIn under Alice H. Murray, or you can go to aliceinwonderingland.wordpress.com. I have to check out your blogs and your articles because they sound so interesting. So Alice, thank you so much for being on our show today, for devoting your time, for devoting your life to doing the work that you've done, and for being so open to share with us facts and information and the misinformation that's out there.
Mhm.
So we applaud the work that we do. We appreciate you. You are just a life changer. And thank you for
Me
everything that you do and for being on the show.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity because, like I said, I really have a passion for adoption. I love to talk about it, answer questions about it. So, this is just wonderful that I could share some of the things that I've seen and learned and things I think people ought to know about it. And
Beautiful.
remember, it's adoption month in November. So, now's the time to, learn things about it.
Exactly. Now's the time to look into adoption as a solution if you, want to be a parent
Yes.
into the wonderful world of parenting.
It will.
So, hang on one second. I'm just going to do a quick outro. So, for everyone that has been listening today, we hope that you enjoyed learning about Adoption 101. I know I learned so much. So, thank you again to Alice H. Murray for being on the show. And if you know someone who is doing amazing things in their community, please reach out to us at info@americanspcc.org. We want to hear about it and we want to highlight you on our show. So again, also please go to americanspcc.org because we have an incredible learning center there filled with amazing, wonderful resources. And that's also where we house all of our podcasts. So again, that's www.americanspcc.org. And you can catch us on Facebook every Wednesday on our wonderful interviews. And remember, A brighter future starts here.